Sometimes you just need to take the slips out and bowl defensively. And you also need to be careful with your computer's defense as well. If you need a VPN, go Nord. NordVPN.com/Kimber to get a 2-year contract with a discount, plus 4 extra months and gifts in some markets. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. So put in some dot balls and turn them into maidens via NordVPN.com/Kimber.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 44 of the Footmarks podcast. I'm your host, Behram and Qazi, who you can find at DefMango on Twitter. And with me, as always, is Jarrod Kimber, who you can find literally everywhere. And our title for today is World Test Permutations. And as that title suggests, we'll be talking about the frontrunners who could potentially play the World Test Championship final in the summer of 2025. Now, we'll be discussing the top 6 test nations only, with all due respect to the West Indies, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. That sounds about fair, right, Jarrod?
Yes. I mean, certainly. I didn't look much at Bangladesh and the West Indies, but I took a little bit of a look at Sri Lanka, and I think they're more likely to come last than make the final, which is funny because they had a really good campaign last time.
Yeah, I mean, Sri Lankan fans will be listening to this and they'll be saying that, hey, we nearly made the final last time and you're not going to be talking about us. But hey, I mean, we just want to be a touch realistic given the draws and everything. And we want to give the top 6 nations probably some more time and, introspect a little more over there. Anyway, after the first 9 months or so in the ongoing World Test Championship cycle, India and Australia occupy the top 2 spots. They are, of course, the finalists from this previous World Test Championship final, which Australia won. No surprises there as such, at least at this stage of the cycle, you'd have to say. And they've got a bit of daylight between, them and the next best team, which is New Zealand at number 3, surprisingly, right now. So, yeah, I mean, you kind of expect that.
Yeah. No, it's the reason I wrote the piece was that Jonathan Norman from TalkSport was pointing out to me that the India-Australia series, because they're playing each other, could be very, very interesting for how this all breaks down. Because it's not ideal to play a 5-test series against someone who you want points against for their game or for the final. And so I looked at teams like New Zealand, who I suppose perennially we see them as a chance. They made the first final. They quite often play short series, which is kind of perfect for this and everything else. They're pretty good at home and everything. So New Zealand was kind of the first. That was the first team I looked at just to make sure if they had a chance or not. And I just couldn't really find a way to make them make it to the final. It would have been interesting because I think I started this piece at like day 2 on Australia, New Zealand. So at one stage, obviously I had them penciled in to win that test match. And I don't even think that would have swung it for them. It's just, that India series is a killer. Like if you're trying to win the World Test Championship points, going to India in the middle of it is so hard because chances are you're not going to win any points, right? But you're certainly not going to win 2 games.
Yeah. I mean, if we dig a little deeper over here, obviously we know that New Zealand are like cricket's, most decorated dark horses, if you will. And I mean, they have won the inaugural edition.
Caps.
Yeah, the blackest caps, sure. But in the inaugural World Test Championship final versus India, they, defeated the almighty Indians and they won that trophy. And that test mace is something that they'll probably cherish a lot because New Zealand came so close in other ICC events and, faltered. They've been like 2 ODI World Cups and 1 T20 World Cup, if I'm not wrong, in the space of 9 years, which is kind of insane. And, they recently got swept versus Australia at home, which isn't a huge surprise given that they haven't defeated Australia at home since 93. That's what 31 years. That's crazy. And
it's a long time.
Even if they were close to winning one of those test matches, they kind of botched it in the end or found a way to botch it. And they, apart from being swept against Australia, they did manage to defeat South Africa's E team or F team at home before that. They drew 1-1 in Bangladesh as well, which in the grand scheme of things is a crucial test match dropped. But if we actually look at the remainder of their series, because they're halfway through, they've played 3 out of 6. They've got England at home, which is a very challenging series, right? They drew 1-1 last time. And then they also will be touring wait a second, where are they going? Let me just check this. Yeah, India and Sri Lanka. Now
Yeah.
that is a tough one, right? Because even in Sri Lanka, you'd expect the home side to give them, a proper run for their money because they've got all of those spinners, and Jayasuriya alone could probably dismantle New Zealand, right? And, even if, let's suppose, they sweep England 3-0 at home, to, somehow come on top versus India and Sri Lanka away, India in particular, that is a challenge in 3 quarters. And their test team is a shadow of the one that won the test championship, right? It's not the same at all. So it's looking rather unlikely, but they managed to draw a test versus India last time around. So there's that.
They did. And India have got flatter pitches at the moment, right? So, I don't know, Kane Williamson and Daryl Mitchell and, what's his name? Blundell could easily bat for days and cause some issues. So I do think that is a possibility there. But I don't see them winning a test against India. And even if you're being friendly against Sri Lanka, and I think you do have to be friendly because realistically, they don't have a spinner. Like, with all due respect to Ajaz Patel, he's kind of, he's a fine bowler in those conditions, but he's kind of on his own. So they don't, Mitchell Santner has never really taken wickets consistently. They had Ishodi bowled in Pakistan. Am I in a test
I
match?
believe
Is that right?
so, yes. I do remember so.
And I'm not having a go at Santner or Ishodi, but they're white ball bowlers, right? Rachin Ravindra and Glenn Phillips will, maybe take some wickets as well. But if you're going up against a full strength Sri Lanka lineup, like, that's just tough, right? So I think it's very unlikely. And then, you talked about the England series as well. Just to go back to that, England should have beaten them last time. Now, that was kind of peak confidence of the Bazball, right? Of, we're rolling forward and everything else.
That was the era of Bazball where losing that test match was self-glorification, that, hey, look, we got a result. We gave you an entertaining test match.
In some ways, losing it was the biggest victory that cricket had had. So I do think there is certainly an element there of what's the best way of putting it? Of Bazball is not at the same level, so they should be slightly better. But New Zealand's a worse team now than they were at that stage. So it's a little bit confusing from that point of view. But it's just they really have to probably beat Sri Lanka 2-0, have a great series against England, and then to do anything. And it's not currently how we would see those series going. It would take a pretty big couple of upsets for them to get to this position, I would say. And then the India stuff is just, as you said, what did you say before? It was a challenge in 3 quarters.
Yeah.
It's I can't see a world where they're going to be able to do that.
I can't even see a world where they draw that series. But here's my question to you. What is more likely, New Zealand making the World Test Championship final or Ajaz Patel getting 10 wickets in an innings again?
I mean, he might have to. so I mean, it's probably more likely that he takes 10 wickets in an innings than anything else. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, they're not. When they had, Bolt and Southey and Wagner and Jameson all available to them, and even players like de Grandhomme and everyone else, they had sort of not a team that could compete in Asia. Oh, sorry, no, a team that could compete in Asia. Not India, but against the other side. It just doesn't really look like that team anymore. And so I'd be surprised. And also, a lot of it will come down to fitness, right? Of who is fit. I thought Jameson bowled really well in one of the tests in India. But do you really want to bowl Jameson in India in a test match anymore? Like, I mean, it's hard enough getting him fit for a normal wicket, let alone one over there. So I think there's a lot of question marks with that. And also, just too many. I think what you'll see, and I know you kind of know this, but with a lot of these teams, just too many things has to go right. But I think even being as optimistic as I could be about New Zealand, I couldn't see it going right enough.
Yeah. And I mean, we don't know how many of these test matches Trent Bolt will play. Maybe none, given the way things are going. And also, they're not even everyone's favorite second team anymore. So they've lost a bit of fanfare because they're playing Scott Kuggeleijn. So they don't even have the prayers with them, right? For those of you who believe in that sort of stuff. But I mean, I don't see New Zealand challenging. In fact, I don't think they're going to finish in the top half of that table even, because I think Bazball will probably come up top versus them away. And then, I mean, even if they are to win 2 test matches versus India and Sri Lanka. That's not going to be enough, not nearly going to be enough. Anyway, over to their trans-Tasman rivals then, Australia, who are the defending champions. Pat Cummins and co may have defended the Ashes in England, but the scoreline was 2-2, and then they drew a series versus the West Indies at home, 1-1, which was a bit of a shocker, and that's a big test match dropped over there. That said, they have swept New Zealand away and Pakistan at home, and those are test matches or test match wins guaranteed for Australia because they don't lose to those two sides much, particularly versus Pakistan at home and New Zealand anywhere at this point. And, even though they've got those 2 clean sweeps and those 2 drawn series, it's a tough one because they've got that 5 test match series versus India. And even though it's in their own backyard, the last 2 times India has toured, they've come out victorious. They've won those series, right? So who's to say that changes this time? And then 2 away tests in Sri Lanka are tricky. They're not particularly, easy pickings for Australia because it wasn't too long ago that they got swept by Sri Lanka 3-0. I mean, it is like a few years now, but, a lot of those guys are still playing. And I remember Khwaja was deemed to be someone who cannot play in Asia after that tour. And look what he's done since then. But do you see room for Australia botching their chances to make the World Test Championship final again and defending their title?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at that sort of the series against Pakistan, West Indies, and New Zealand as a whole, so what's 6 tests? You followed them. They didn't look that good in those series. They actually reminded me a lot of South Africa, where you were just like, the bowlers could keep them in any game, but they're gonna need someone to actually make consistent runs for them, and it didn't look that likely at that point. So you put that pressure when they travel away to Sri Lanka. It's quite interesting. They've had mixed results in Sri Lanka over the years. They've, certainly won some series that I didn't expect them to win. They've been terrible in other series I expected them to be competitive in. So, I think they're in an interesting zone over the last, 7 or 8 years in Sri Lanka. But they kind of have just put a little bit more pressure on themselves by dropping that West Indies test, right? Like, that's the big one. If they dropped the one to New Zealand as well, it would have been everything would have been going on. But that one against the West Indies really changes things because they kind of now have to win probably 3-2 against India. And then also they need to be in a situation where they win at least 1 test against Sri Lanka with the opportunity perhaps to win 2, depending on how the rest of the results go.
Yeah.
If they beat West Indies, that would have just been a little bit easier, right? Like, a 1-1 or a 1-0 in Sri Lanka wouldn't have been the end of the world. But now they just ratcheted that up a little bit. And as you said, India have beaten them. For the purposes of this, and when I did it originally, I put 3-2 to Australia just because home team. I think these teams are fairly even. India have done well the last couple of times, but even so, you probably would assume that Australia would come out on top. But I was also flexible enough to look at the results in other ways and see how things would have gone. And there is a possibility that India could win that as well. So if India win 3-2, then suddenly things are really, really different for Australia from that moment on.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the Border Gavaskar Trophy in this cycle is the big one. 5 test matches, India and Australia in Australia. So that pretty much might decide the fate of one of those 2 teams. We'll get to that fun stuff later. But it's just that Sri Lanka series, right? It's the last one they play. It's somewhere, or it's a venue where they've, sometimes they've succeeded, sometimes they've failed. Either they succeed royally or they fail royally. And if Sri Lanka catch them in a spin, well, imagine them winning the Border Gavaskar Trophy and then losing both tests in Sri Lanka and missing out. It's not something that isn't possible. It's something that, could happen.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's unlikely Australia don't win a test, right? I think that's like, if you were looking at it, you would say to yourself, they should win a test in that series. But you're right. It's not outside the realms of possibility that Australia go to Sri Lanka and don't win a test match. It could be, I haven't checked if it's rainy season. It's always, the 2 seasons I never understand in Sri Lanka are rainy season and Rambutan season. And Sri Lankans
You've mentioned this.
Yeah. Sri Lankans will understand at least one of these. And so, when it comes down to it, yeah, I think you're right. I think there is a legitimate chance for that to happen. But I'm more confident in Australia probably winning a test match, right?
Imagine
Winning
imagine them winning the Border Gavaskar Trophy and then both of those tests versus Sri Lanka getting rained out. That would be a proper, damp squib. That would screw them over.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's so many different ways that can go. But so if you look in, I just bringing up the record here. So they were in 2022. They split that series 1-1, and 2016 is the one you were talking about. They lost 3-0 there. 2011, I know this is going back a long way. They won that series in 2011, but it was 1 win and 2 draws. So I think the first game might have been the Nathan Lyon game when he took Kumar. And they don't play in Sri Lanka all that often. So those are the last 3 series that they've played in Sri Lanka in the last 20 years, right? We know they struggle with the turning ball. The ball turns more in Sri Lanka than anywhere else. And so it's, there's a possibility. It's one of those things where if you told me Australia won 2-0, I'd be like, yeah, that's fair. If you told me it was 1-1, I'd be like, okay, I can see that. And if you told me that, Sri Lanka won 2-0, I'd be like, okay, didn't see that coming, but I can work back from that. Like, I'd be shocked if Australia don't win a test. But I don't think it's, as I said, beyond, like when we go back to India, New Zealand, if you told me that that New Zealand won 2 tests in India, I'd be like, what happened? Yeah. I need to see the tape. You're going to have to show me how this happened, right? And if you said that India and New Zealand won 1 test, based on what I've seen of New Zealand recently, I'd be like, all right, what happened? Was there injuries or, whereas I don't think those sorts of things need to happen for Sri Lanka to win that series. So it shows you what pressure Australia's under. Now, Australia could absolutely smash India at home, right? Like we've seen some, we just saw what I would call a fairly competitive 4-1 series between India and England. And we saw another one in 2018 where India did really well and still lost that series really easily, right? Sometimes you see that. And if there could be that India play really good cricket, but Australia just keep getting over the line as home teams often do. Yeah, I mean, and if that's the case, then Australia's in a much better position. But if that doesn't happen, or there's draws or anything else, it gets very interesting very fast.
I don't have Australia sweeping India or even winning 4-1 for that matter at home versus India because, India's been playing a lot in Australia recently. They understand the surfaces. Their batters are confident to score runs over there, and they've got a killer bowling attack as well, right? Even if you just look at their seamers, Bumrah alone would cause them a fair few problems. But let's just put it this way, that if Australia or this Australian team can lose a test match versus the West Indies at home, nearly lose to New Zealand after God knows how many years, or 31, as we said earlier, and also they were in a position to drop a test or 2 versus Pakistan. Keeping all of those things in mind, it is, like you mentioned, not beyond the realms of possibility that they kind of shit the bed in Sri Lanka. And that might be the series which decides their fate, which makes the cycle all the more interesting.
It's 7 tests. I think we would both agree that they should win 4 of those matches, right? Yeah. And depending on how the other results go, that might be enough, right? Just to win those 4. The issue for Australia is 5 out of 7 playing in conditions they don't particularly like, and then also playing the best team in the world is going to be tricky. That's a lot of wins in 7 matches, right? Yeah. And that's not factoring in rain for one of them, right? And all those sorts of things. So I think it's interesting from them. I still think that they are the most likely finalist alongside India, but I certainly don't think that it's a lock for them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been observing Pat Cummins Australia for a while, ever since he took over the job. And across all formats, I'd say that they somehow managed to get over the line. They're scrappy, but good at being scrappy. So I do see them making the final as well, but not so comfortably. Let's just put it that way. But yeah.
No, so just to get back to the scrappy thing, that's kind of why I don't think they'll lose both tests in Sri Lanka, right? I just think they will find a way to be able to do that. But you're right.
Yeah, Steve Smith, 100 in Sri Lanka. That's going to save them, right, as opener. Anyway, let's shift our focus to South Africa now. And I feel like that series loss, 2-0 series loss versus New Zealand away could cost them big time over here, right? They had a favorable draw. You could argue the most favorable draw coming into this World Test Championship cycle. They were playing India at home in 2 tests, which is a series that they've split 1-1. And then, of course, those 2 test matches versus New Zealand, if you had full strength South Africa, you could make a case that they could win both. But thanks to the SA20 and their weak finances, they'll have to win the bulk of their games here on. And they play Pakistan and Sri Lanka at home. So 2 Asian sides at home is something that definitely favors them. And their away series are coming against Bangladesh and West Indies, which are lower ranked sides. Although I will say that they could drop a test in both of those venues because Bangladesh is sturdy at home and the West Indies have a knack of pulling off that, solitary win and making us believe that they're back every single time. So
the West Indies are interesting because they're kind of like South Africa light. Their bowling attack isn't quite as good as South Africa, but they've got bowlers who can win them games, but they don't really have batters who can keep them in them, which means they, as they showed with Australia, West Indies are capable of pinching the test. And we've seen that at times against England and other teams where you're just like, oh my God, their bowlers have all got it together. If Kemo Roach is in form and you can get one other young fast bowler with him and then 2 or 3, suddenly they look like a really, really good side. And they've got a great spinner now as well. So, I should say, great young prospect in Gudakesh Modi. But, there's a lot to like of their bowling attack. There's not as much to like with their batting. That is honest. But yeah, so just to go back to the New Zealand series, I'm sure we'll come to that at the very end. But on the series itself, so going into that, South Africa had won 26 tests and lost 5 to New Zealand. So you just said that they had the best WTC schedule, right? And they did. I never went back and did ratings because I think I had time when it happened, so I never got a chance to go back. But I had a quick look at it this time, and I was like, yeah, that's the team that had the best ratings. With that said, if you also throw in the fact that they had an absolutely brilliant record against New Zealand, they should have been finalists, right? So losing both of those tests, and they almost stole one of them even with their F side, losing both of those tests is really, really tricky. So are you willing to say that they will win 4-0 against Pakistan and Sri Lanka at home?
Now, that's the tricky one, right? Because Sri Lanka are the only Asian side to have ever defeated South Africa in a test series played in South Africa. And Pakistan are mercurial once again. The consistency has gone out the road. So
and South Africa don't have batters. So you could easily, all you need is one good spell from Shaheen or Madashankar or whoever. And South Africa could be in all sorts. But also, you would have to say that South Africa should win all 4 of those matches.
Yeah. I mean, in theory, yes, South Africa start as favorites in all 4 of those matches, and even, slight favorites in the away matches, if we really are being honest. I mean, Bangladesh is a tricky one because they also don't know how to play spin.
Let's go with it. Are you willing to give them 4-0 in the home? That's my first question to you.
Yes, I am. I mean, theoretically.
So West Indies. So I did this, and Neil Manthorpe, Jonathan Norman. I can't remember. Maybe Alex Shooter was there with me as well. We were going through that, and I said 1-1 in the West Indies, and Manthorpe was not having it. He was like, "There's no way they're going to lose." Blah blah blah. And I said, I can easily see how the West Indies win a Test match in that series. What do you think? And I'm asking you, what is the most likely result? Not, is it 1-1 or is it 2-0?
I would say 1-1 actually, because I do feel like the West Indies are that sort of a team.
Especially
at home, right? Because we see that they routinely defeat England at home. Yeah. They defeated Pakistan in a test match at home recently as well. And Pakistan were, pound for pound, the better side in those or between those 2 teams. So I can definitely see them upset South Africa in one of those games. And you know what? It's not unimaginable to me either if the West Indies sweep that series. I mean, it's not, not a possibility once again. It's within the realms, I feel.
If it's a really low-scoring series, then it could be 2-0 in either direction. I don't disagree with that. I can see, I can't see how the West Indies can make if there's decent runs scored. I just can't see them making enough runs to win that series. But if they're low scoring, okay. So Bangladesh.
Wait a second though. Back to the West Indies. It also depends on what sort of surfaces they get. If they get quick surfaces, then South Africa are favorites. But if they get slow and low turners, if they are to play a test match in Guyana, then hey, they're not favorites to win that one, are they?
I don't know. I mean, I kind of feel that the West Indies bowlers want quicker wickets as well. So, what you don't want to do against South Africa is probably give them bouncy wickets, right? But seam-friendly wickets maybe helps both teams. So I don't know. It's a very, very fair point.
Could be a shootout. I would love it for it to be a shootout.
I think it'll be it might be one of the most fascinating series as it is on even if it doesn't end up being that important, because I'm just not 100% sure which direction that we would go in there. Okay, so let's say it's going to be 1-1 for now. South Africa, Bangladesh. Right? So in the history of South Africa and Bangladesh, and they're both newer teams in some ways, but there have been 6 tests played in Bangladesh between these two teams. South Africa have won 4, and Bangladesh have Bangladesh haven't won. So it was, South Africa have won 4, and there have been 2 draws, right? Fine. We know that South Africa is the better team, but that's fine. But that last win that South Africa had was in 2008.
Wow.
Right?
That's 16 years ago. And by the time they play the series, it'll be 17 years or something.
Right. And so there were 2 tests in the middle, which were in Chattogram and Mirpur. 2015, they were both drawn. Right. So that could end up being the most important series, certainly from a South African point of view, and certainly from upsetting India and Australia's point of view. And I don't know how to run a form guide on this. So I was looking up the stats. Remember, I was looking up the sweep stats the other day. Something I noticed was that the South African players are terrible at playing the sweep. And that used to be their staple shot, right? My feeling is that they're not particularly good in subcontinental conditions as a batting team at the moment. And so that's not in their favor. So, and you could almost make a claim at the moment that Bangladesh is the most subcontinental conditions, right? Because it has the least amount of bounce. You're going to get spin, and you're also going to get slow wickets at times. So, at least in India and Sri Lanka, balls sometimes come onto the bat nicely, and so you can still play your shots. That's not always the case. It depends on which wickets and all that sort of stuff. But it does feel a little bit like how is that going to go? I don't know the answer. I'm not sure if you have a good answer for that. I went 1-1 again just because I don't know.
I mean, we are saying in this assumption that Bangladesh win their first ever test match versus South Africa at home. I can see that happening. That's definitely something that, could very well happen. And, Super Shanto is around, so you never know. He wins them a test or two. But,
and also, but when you say it's their first ever test against South Africa at home, they have beaten Australia, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, England at home, haven't they?
They haven't defeated Pakistan at home. No.
Is Pakistan the one they haven't? But there's a bunch of teams bunch of good teams they've beaten at home. But I would say most of those victories are after 2015.
That's true.
They're a much better team after 2015 than they were beforehand, right? So again, I'm just throwing it out there because it's confusing. I don't really know what the the true results of that will be. But what I can say is this, that I don't think South Africa is set up to go there and be good, right?
I mean, they would be overly dependent on Keshav Maharaj, I feel, and Taijul is there for Bangladesh. This series could be so epic that the name of the series for future years to come could be the Islam Maharaj series. How about that?
So I'm just having a look here at the averages. So this is the averages. So Bangladesh bowlers in Asia average 32. They're spinners, and South Africa haven't played in Asia. Wait a minute. When was the last time South Africa played in Asia? I didn't even know.
Isn't it? Which they lost 2-0, but those weren't spin-friendly surfaces. Those were the last of the... Yeah, that was 2021, I believe, and it was the last of the good surfaces we ever saw in Test cricket in Pakistan.
And then they went to India and struggled on real rages a while before that. So, do you know what I mean? Like, how do you get a form line on this? Like, where is this going? If this team doesn't play there, it's not, these are not easy things to do. And, if you don't spend a lot of time playing in Bangladesh, those wickets are tricky. We remember back in the old days when teams used to go there, even when Bangladesh wasn't particularly good, teams sometimes just had trouble just getting through, right? Like, it wasn't the most normal thing. So let's have a look. Yeah, so 2019, you said they played in Pakistan. When was that?
2021, quite sure.
Why can't I find that?
They lost 2-0. Yeah.
So they were there. They were in Pakistan then. They were in India in 2019. And then they were in Sri Lanka in 2018. So they have played 3 test series since 2015 in Asia.
And how many test matches have they won out of those 3 series? Probably 1 at best?
They lost 2-0 to Sri Lanka. They lost
Then none.
3-0 to India, and then lost both to Pakistan.
So they've been swept in Asia.
So my question is, am I being friendly in saying that Bangladesh should only win 1 game? You could make an argument that Bangladesh win both these games. It's how South Africa handled these conditions is fascinating. And, it's a little bit different these days. Some of the players will have played franchise cricket around the world and everything else. But Bangladesh wickets are different to other wickets. So I can see a way where those 4 test matches we just talked about, the 2 in the West Indies and 2 in Bangladesh, South Africa might only win 1 of those, right?
It could happen.
But the other side of it is they could also win 3, right? I don't think they can win all 4 because I think that is craziness. But I do think they can win 3. So now you start to look at, well, how many test matches is Australia going to win? And can South Africa slip in? If they can win all of those test matches, they certainly make a bit of a mess of Australia and India's plans. But can they win all of those test matches? Because you weren't even 100% positive they were going to win them all at home. To think that they would win all of them, even if they should go in favourite for each series to win at least win the series, right? But I don't think they're a favourite to win 2-0 every single time.
I mean, given those stats in Asia that we just discussed, that the last 3 times they toured, they lost all 7 test matches. That really puts a big question mark on the Bangladesh series. And also in the last 3 years where they haven't really played much in Asia, maybe it's just that Pakistan series, which wasn't particularly, you can't say those were spin-friendly wickets. They lost both test matches over there as well. They've won, 11 tests and lost 9 in these last 3 years. So not playing in Asia, they have a touch better than 50% record. And now we're putting them in Asia and the West Indies, which could turn potentially. So it's interesting, right? And all of a sudden, you thought, or both of us, I guess, when we started looking at this, thought of South Africa as the spoiler team given the favorable draw. All of a sudden, it looks quite complicated.
A lot of people complain that I'm not a former cricketer and so that I don't really know the game. Well, you know what they can't claim? That I don't know desks. I've been using desks for years. I'm a collector of desks, old and new, and I'm sitting on a new one right now. I'm the Don Bradman of sitting at desks. So when I tell you that the E7 Pro next generation height adjustable desk from FlexiSpot is legit, this is like Michael Jordan talking to you about sneakers. This desk holds 160 kilograms. It is as stable as anything I've ever seen, and it has under desk cable management. But really, the main skill here is that this desk rises and falls at the push of a button, and it moves super quick. And it has so many settings that remember your favorite heights. It really does it all. And I could not recommend the E7 Pro from FlexiSpot anymore, even though I am currently sitting on one of FlexiSpot's BS12 Pro multifunctional, adjustable, upgraded fabric, ergonomic chairs. My butt and computer have never been happier than when using one of FlexiSpot's products. So get over to their page right now for big savings. Yeah, it looks unlikely. And I suppose this is where I want to come back to the first bit. If this happens and West Indies steal a test and Bangladesh beat them in a couple of tests, or, Sri Lanka beat them in a test, whatever that may be, and they just miss out. And they miss out because they send an F team to New Zealand when a full strength team should have at least won a test match. And considering the history of South Africa and New Zealand, they would have been hoping for 2. It's a real slap in the face, right? Because they put the SA20 first, and they would have had a chance of actually winning a major ICC tournament, and they found a new way to sabotage themselves. So if they do end up within touching distance of that, a lot of us are going to go back and have a look at those points and go, "Oh my God, they rain ruled themselves."
Yeah, basically. I mean, this time they took fate into their own hands, and they were like, forget the rain gods. We're going to make sure that we give ourselves less of a chance. Anyway, let's move on. Let's speak about England's Baz bowlers. They've just lost a series in India, but they did manage to win a test out of 5, lost 4, of course, and they drew 2-2 versus Australia at home in the Ashes. Now, They are slated in to tour New Zealand and Pakistan, where they've got 3 test matches each. And they're hosting Sri Lanka and the West Indies. So I can see them sweeping those home tests, right? They could win all of those games versus Sri Lanka and the West Indies because they're weaker opposition and they're playing in conditions that they're used to. And, New Zealand and Pakistan aren't the worst away tours either. They swept Pakistan last time they toured. And that was one of those major baseball victories. And that was the first time Pakistan ever got swept in a test series played in their own backyard. And then New Zealand, pound for pound, they're a better team. And they should have won the last series, drew that 1-1. And they'll back themselves to win it this time around as well. But looking at their results that have already come in, England are probably going to have to win 90% of these tests to give themselves a chance?
That's the problem with them in South Africa, really. It's just the amount of tests that they need to win. As you said before, home tests, not too worried about. Away tests, I mean, they don't play draws. So I'm pretty confident that they're going to have result tests against Pakistan, but will they be able to sweep the table again? It seems less likely than it did last time. Although, to be fair, I don't think it was that likely coming in last time. But and then New Zealand's probably slightly worse again. Certainly with the fast bowling. And maybe England won't put them in a position to win. But I think New Zealand still has the ability to bat out draws and elongate games and do other things. So it's tough, I think, for England to be able to do that, and it would be it would be a hell of a run if they did that. And considering everyone's already given up on baseball, it would be hilarious if they did manage to do it. It's like the hilarity we get from the South Africa shooting themselves in the foot would be everyone going, baseball's dead, and then suddenly going, oh shit, they made the final. But I don't see it happening. I just don't see it happening. I think too many things can go wrong. Again, just to talk about the West Indies, as I said, West Indies are always a chance of just stealing a test. Right?
And they have done that in England on a fair few tours.
So if you think about it, they're playing 4 tests against South Africa and England, 2 at home, 2 away. I don't think it's possible that they lose 4-0. It's also very possible they steal at least 1 test in that 4-group cluster. And if they do, whoever they steal it off is probably going to be the team that is ruled out first. But I just think too many things have to go right for England, no weather problems, and the Pakistan, they have to find ways to force results on Pakistani pitches. We don't know what the Pakistani pitches are going to be like. We're hoping they're going to be better, but if they're not, you're going to have to force results there. And New Zealand is probably the most experienced. Would New Zealand? What have they played? New Zealand and Australia. I suppose New Zealand, Australia, and India. No, India would be the most experienced team against baseball at the moment, wouldn't they? Because they would have played 6 tests against it. But New Zealand's right up there. They're not going to be surprised by anything that happens in baseball, right? So they won't be caught out. That it'll have to be that England beat them.
Yeah, I mean, the West Indies have proven to be a bit of a bogey team for England in tests, even in home tests. Honestly, they do steal a test from them every now and then, and they have defeated them tour after tour when they play in the Caribbean. But let's hypothetically assume that England sweep the West Indies and Sri Lanka at home. I do see them winning those away series versus New Zealand and Pakistan, but I don't see them sweeping it or those 2 tours, right? And they kind of need that. They kind of need this is 10 test matches, is it? Or something close to that? 3 versus Pakistan, 3 versus New Zealand, and then 4. Yeah. 4. Or is it 5?
I think, actually, that's a very good question. Yeah. I don't have it in front of me, but yeah. No, you're right. I think they would have to. I think it's 11 tests they're playing, isn't it? Off the top of my head.
I mean, I don't see England playing two test match series at home in a summer, right? That's just not enough.
No, I'm pretty sure you're right, actually, now that you said that. But yes, it's a lot of, so they're going to have to win. I think I worked out that even to give themselves a rough chance, they would have to win 10 out of 11.
Yeah.
And they probably have to win at 11 out of 11, depending on what happens with South Africa, India, and Australia. So yes, it would be very, very hard for that to happen. It's just not like it's not that these things are impossible. It's just that when you look at them, actually it's 12 tests.
Ooh, then there you go. They'll probably have to win around 11, which makes it all the more harder.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but yeah. So it's 6 at home. we're so used to 2-test series. We're both shocked when teams are actually playing each other properly.
Yeah, England always played 3-test match series, or for the most part they do. So that kind of makes sense. But yeah, winning 11 out of 12, that seems like a bit of a long shot, particularly given their style of play and how teams are now more accustomed to, or how they are to tackle baseball. But yeah,
because I think aren't they really low at the moment on the points table? They're second last, aren't they?
Yeah.
They've played 10 matches, and they've got they've won three, lost 6, and have 1 draw. So like you can, and to be fair, South Africa are quite low as well. South Africa have won 1 out of their 4 matches, but both of those teams can go on a run from here, as we've talked about it. It's just whether they can run hard enough, and it looks unlikely to me.
That Ranchi test is going to bite them in the back, because had they just won over there, it might have changed their fortunes. Because if you talk about England winning 10 out of those 12 test matches, all of a sudden I'm like, okay, can be done, is possible.
Also, there's 2 wins, if you think about it. So the Ranchi test is a good example, but also the rained out test at Old Trafford.
Yes.
So, or the Pat Cummins, Nathan Lyon partnership at Edgbaston. So they actually, if one of those games had gone, because they would have then taken points off one of the other potential finalists as well. So that's almost like a bunch of hinge points that have gone against them. But yeah, it's very unlikely.
Yeah, they'll make the moral finals though, so that's all well.
They're already in. They've already won that tournament.
They've won it. The moral World Test Championship, both of those they've won, or at least one of those they've won.
New Zealand forfeited it by bringing Kugelane in.
Yeah. Anyway, time to speak about Pakistan. They won both tests.
Do you really want to?
Of course I do. That's my favorite part of this podcast. They started off their campaign on a solid, they had a solid start. They won both of those test matches versus Sri Lanka, and even though they were the better team pound for pound, it's Sri Lanka, and they're always a sturdy team at home, and they will win a lot of games. And I feel like Sri Lanka playing Test cricket at home is Sri Lanka's best format. That's when you see the best of them, right? But then they lost all 3 to Australia in Australia, which is customary for Pakistan at this point, because the last time they won in Australia, a single test match, was Sydney 95. So I was 1.5 years old, or nearly 2. That's just to put things into context. Now, they are set to host England, Bangladesh, and the West Indies at home. And I can see them sweeping the latter 2. I can see them winning both tests versus the West Indies and both tests versus Bangladesh. But England will be the real challenge over there, considering they got whitewashed by Stokes and McCullum and their boys the last time those guys toured for 3 test matches. And I hope, that the pitches are better. The surfaces are, there's something in those surfaces for the bowlers, because that'll give Pakistan a better chance, honestly. But the one series that really kills this entire ordeal for them is that away tour to South Africa. They've got 2 test matches over there. And in the history of South Africa versus Pakistan in South Africa, there have been 14 test matches and Pakistan has won 2. So that's a pretty, dodgy win percentage. And they've never won a test series in South Africa, but have drawn one back in 97, 98. And, lateral movement plus bounce, Pakistan is definitely going to struggle versus South Africa's pace bowling attack. But, they might be able to sneak away with a test win if their bowlers come to the party. But that said, it's just one of those situations where too many things need to happen for them to have a shot at the final. Because, when I looked at their draw prior to the start of the World Test Championship cycle, I said, tours to Australia and South Africa, the 2 places Pakistan have never won a test series. This one's gone. It's done. And they'll have to really play out of their skins just to be, in contention, I would say. Forget actually making the final.
Yeah, I mean, let's just give them the credit of West Indies, Bangladesh, although I don't think those are foregone conclusions.
Yeah.
They looked spooked against England last time. They will be more aware of how to play against England this time, but that's an issue for them. And then, as you said, they've got South Africa at the end. But I think the biggest issue is, my guess is the pitches will be slightly more favorable to batting than what we saw in that horrendous summer that ruined their last campaign.
Yeah. I mean, think about this. They won 2-0 versus South Africa. Then they had all of these big teams slated into tour. Australia was, the longest test series in history. Those 3 test matches felt like forever. And Australia, came out on top with a 1-0 victory margin. And they had to save the second test, like, dramatically, right? And then they lost 3-0 to England, and in the 0-0 draw versus New Zealand, they were the team that were about to lose those games, but they saved those test matches. So
Yeah.
they've been very, very poor at home. They'll have to change those surfaces or alter their conditions, because Pakistan are not the sort of team that can bat other teams out of test matches.
So here's my thing for you. I think some of the pitches will be changed. But I think there'll be some pitches that will not be changed. And because of that, I still think you have to factor draws in to those. And that's where there's just, they can't play the catch-up game, right? Like it's just, again, it's just too much that they need to do in those situations. So, I'm not sure they're playing particularly great cricket either. So, at least with South Africa, you can say, it's messy what South Africa's doing. But, when it's messy, they can win games as well. Whereas when Pakistan's messy, you're like, I don't know. But they didn't play terrible cricket in Australia. So I'll give them a small bump for that and see how they go. But I'd be absolutely, it would have to be like a proper Pakistani World Cup run to come back, right? Like, it's a bit like what we were talking about with England. It is mathematically possible, but you'd be shocked if they ended up in that final.
Yeah, I mean, they still don't have a formidable spinner in any format.
Yeah.
Abrar would really have to, bowl some worldies in order for them to kind of win games via spin. And then if you take Shaheen and Naseem out of the pace attack, it looks very toothless, doesn't it? So
and one injury to them is, and especially that's the other problem with playing on flat pitches as well. Like you bowl those guys into the ground.
Yeah, and they bowled those guys into the ground regardless, because Pakistan played their first string team versus Nepal at home in the Asia Cup. So, there are lots of issues over there. Let's talk about India now. I saved the best for last. And, you'd imagine India to make the World Test Championship final again, just because they have so much quality in their ranks. Just recently, they're defeated
on top
England
at the moment as well.
Yeah, they're on top at the moment. They defeated England at home with a side which had some absentees, some injuries, no Kohli. And they rested a few players here and there. So even with their somewhat second string team, they look very, very dominant versus England's Baz bowlers at home. And, they've been pretty much the most consistent test team for the last decade or something, right? And they're a good away team as well. So you would put your money on India to make the final once again and play 3 World Test Championship finals on the bounce. But, even though they've defeated England at home, they did drop a test, right? So that does kind of slightly complicate things. And then they drew one in the West Indies, right? That is a test match that they should have won. And Rain played spoil sport for, some part of that. But got to give credit to the West Indies as well. Now, the drawn series in South Africa actually helps them over here, because had they lost that 2-0, it would have complicated things for them a whole lot more. It's that 5 test match series versus Australia, really, that it all boils down to for India. They need to be able to win 2 to 3 test matches over there to kind of secure their spot. Because you say that versus New Zealand and Bangladesh at home, they should be winning all of those test matches. Like, that's a short thing unless something dramatic happens. So India, whilst are in probably the best position to make yet another World Test Championship final, it's not as cozy as it looks.
No. I mean, because they're playing Australia and Australia can get on a roll against them. Even a good team can travel away from home and find themselves behind and get sort of rolled over, right, and trampled on. So the South Africa loss was a kick to the teeth, because they should have won that series 2-0. I know South Africa's a good spoiler team, but they just should be able to win those test matches. But they should roll through Bangladesh and New Zealand, as you said, and then it comes down to how well they play. And it almost feels like they played so well in Australia twice in a row that either they've worked out how to play well in Australia, or there's about to be a big regression.
Yeah. Trust them to make some very, very, let's just say, animated advertisements for that series, because they've won twice now, right? So we'll get to see some fun content.
The interesting thing about that series is that it's already the biggest series in cricket, right? And it feels bigger when India go to Australia than when Australia go to India, because I suppose India have a chance of winning. And so both teams are more even, right? Whereas the other one, you're just like, well, Australia's going to India and they're going to lose. Maybe they'll win a test. And so when India go to Australia, that is the biggest series now in world cricket. But the interesting thing for this is it's also the biggest swing series because it is 5 test matches, and because it is the 2 teams most likely to make the finals. Like if one team does win 4-1 or 3-0 or it's 2-2 or whatever, all of those results are absolutely huge.
Yeah. And I mean, yes, this is the biggest series of the cycle, and it's the biggest series in Test cricket at the moment currently as well. I mean, it's more competitive than the Ashes when India tour Australia because they have won twice, right? And you get to see some memorable cricket, even when they weren't winning. Kohli scoring those twin tons in Adelaide is something everyone remembers. And I suppose it's safe to say that in the context of this cycle of the World Test Championship, the most important series are, of course, the Border Gavaskar Trophy in Australia. And then pretty much every series that South Africa plays, right? And Australia, Sri Lanka. Let's not forget that one.
Yeah. So, yes, South Africa, I suppose, are interesting just because, we talked about, Pakistan and England are very unlikely, but mathematically possible. Whereas South Africa are, and, so that would be interesting. And so, I think what's interesting about the Sri Lanka in Australia series is that it comes after the India-Australia one. And by that stage, if we're lucky, Australia are going to have to do something in that series in order to get the World Test Championship. And if we're really lucky, the ideal situation is Australia have to win 2-0. Right?
That would be amazing.
And they turn up to Sri Lanka and they win the first test, and the second test is a dogfight. Would be absolutely perfect for the World Test Championship. But I think even if you look at I think it's, I'm just trying to remember my dates, but I think I've got this right. Australia, India, and South Africa versus Asia, the rest of Asia, except for Bangladesh, is all at the same time. So we're going to be having tests in 2 different time zones that sort of complement each other, so you can watch them back to back. That will actually relate to each other. So India has a bad day and South Africa has a good day, or vice versa, and suddenly the narrative is all there. If we can then roll that into this Australia-Sri Lanka series, and this is where the World Test Championship could be absolutely massive, right? I'm not expecting 20 million Indians to watch Australia-Sri Lanka. But I am expecting to be 3 to 4 times as much interest in that series as there would normally be. If it is down to, India need a certain result to guarantee their spot. And it might not be. It might be South Africa. But either way, that's kind of what the World Test Championship is supposed to be. Because with all due respect, since Murali is retired, Australia, Sri Lanka Test matches just don't mean as much. They happen. They exist. But they don't mean as much. Whereas here, you have the ability for them to be perhaps the most followed Australia Sri Lanka series of all time, just because maybe South Africans are interested. I know maybe the English are interested, maybe the Indians are interested, whoever that may be. That's a fascinating twist, right? And that is what the World Test Championship needs. A Border Gavaskar Trophy that is not only just important because it's important, because everything about the Border Gavaskar Trophy is important, but also because of WTC. And then you got 2 other test series that, again, most people wouldn't follow: South Africa versus Pakistan or
Bangladesh. South Africa, Bangladesh, and West Indies, right?
No, I'm talking about the
home
ones
test.
I'm talking about the ones that are happening at the same time, the home test. Again, you just expect the Asian teams to go over there and lose, and then suddenly Kusal does something crazy and you have to follow it. But and then you've got this Australia Sri Lanka series at the end. So it's a fascinating little thing, and it could be that, I think I worked this out, that Australia could be 2nd ranked. Is that right? And Sri Lanka could be 8th ranked coming into that series. So again, there is no reason to have any excitement over it, but it might be that Australia need to continue to win both those tests. Or maybe and here's another fascinating one. Australia could be the team that has the semi-final spot almost sewn up and loses the first test to Sri Lanka. There's so many permutations that could go in each direction. It's really quite fascinating. And, I think one of the problems we have in cricket is that there aren't that many people who cover the global game yet. And so it's very hard. And, huge shout out to, and I've forgotten his name now. I know his Reddit name, but the website is called cricket11.com. And he's got this predictor up, and you can go in and you can pull all this up. And on Reddit, he's known as Andrew TIE Fighter, because that's a fucking brilliant name. But the ability, and the ICC used to have this up. Why the ICC got rid of it, Behram, I don't know. But anyway, that's a different conversation.
I remember that predictor. It was fun.
Yeah. And so, this one isn't perfect, and I'm sure there'll be some changes to these theories. But, we're putting on an extra test. We're taking away 2 tests. These 2 countries no longer exist. Whatever will happen. But the point being is, when you actually take a look at this, it's quite a fascinating, race on the way there. Even if it might only end up being those 3 teams, you could end up having situations where a team like Sri Lanka, because of who they're playing and when they're playing them, and Bangladesh is another case here. They might actually have an outsized role to play in the World Test Championship, even if they can't make the final themselves.
Yeah. And I mean, over the course of 2 completed World Test Championships, and now we're into the 3rd, it's been a bit of a slow start to, the title in general, because everyone's like bought into the final, right? Everyone enjoys that. They look forward to it. But the build up to the final hasn't been as well advertised as you'd wanted, because sure, every series that the big 3 play amongst each other, that's very well advertised. You could throw in every India series in that as well. Maybe South Africa home series, because everyone kind of tunes into those test matches. But context and narrative building hasn't been perfect with respect to the World Test Championship. And this could be that cycle in which it changes. And whilst I still don't think this is a sustainable model to kind of keep Test cricket relevant, absolutely not. I mean, ensuring a minimum number of games per team and equal pay and all of that stuff would definitely help. But whilst that is all, an ideal world sort of situation and a pipe dream, what we do have over here is something that could really kind of change that narrative that revolves around this tournament.
No, exactly. And that's kind of best case scenario for the World Test Championship. If it makes random series slightly more important, if it means that people are looking forward to different series, if it means that there is more, as you said, narrative or energy, anything like that coming through, all they're really doing is putting 1 extra test match on, and a little bit of marketing around. There's not that much else that they actually do. That would be a massive win for what is a small undertaking, all things considered. And also, the World Test Championship does get really good views. It does help the ICC get more money, which is, it might sound weird, but the ICC needs money, because a vast majority of the ICC money obviously just goes directly to the boards. That ability to be able to administer the game better and all these different things. So I think it's a really, really important thing. And, we're still a way off from what the ICC want, which, let's be honest, is India-Pakistan in the final. But they gave, they had a pretty good draw last time and they couldn't do it. Maybe next time they'll be in a better position. But, this is the next best thing. An India-Australia final off the back of a dogfight Border Gavaskar Trophy, and Australia winning a tough test over Sri Lanka to knock South Africa out at the last minute. It's kind of, again, just exactly what this tournament needs, or not tournament, but final needs.
Yeah, cyclical sort of league structure, whatever you'd like to call it, with a final at the end. But I hope that whenever that series comes around, Australia versus Sri Lanka, we are talking about all of this stuff in a podcast, and how Test cricket is alive all of a sudden, and fun stuff like that, rosy things, which, colorful rainbow, all that crap. But before we end this podcast, let's just take some quick predictions. I'm going to go safe here. India, Australia in the final.
Yeah, certainly. I would say I didn't do like a percentage chance of winning, but when I just went through and picked all the different winners, in an unbiased way of just like, okay, this conditions, these teams, this is how I think they're going to go. I had India and Australia in the final, and I think too many things have to go right for England or South Africa in order to make it through. And I just don't think those teams are as good. So I can't see that happening for them.
Yeah, I'll go one deeper level and say that Ashwin will play in this World Test Championship final versus Australia. He'll get a 10-fer and India will find a way to lose it.
Well, I mean, that would be remarkable if they made a third final and lost it. And if that's the case, the BCCI just need to get their act together and get a game over there. Because that's the other thing. It can't keep being in England. I know there are tricky reasons why it can't be in other places, but eventually it just has to be played in some other places, right? Like it's getting a bit ridiculous at this point.
Yeah, definitely. And, we had the first 3 ODI World Cups in England and then it moved. So maybe this is the last time for a bit that we see the World Test Championship final being played in England. Anyway, though, everyone who was watching and stuck around up until this point, let us know your predictions for whoever will be making the World Test Championship final. As per you, leave that in the comments below. And that'll be the end of this episode of the Footmarks podcast. We'll be back with another episode next week. That's all for now. Goodbye.